All right, so I would like to welcome everyone to our joint event between University of New York in Prague and Future Females. I welcome our audience here in the room, our audience online on Zoom and on YouTube. Today we'll be talking about women in business, the challenges that they face in entrepreneurship and how to succeed in being entrepreneurs. I would like to welcome our guest speakers here with me, Ayesha Rekhi, the ambassador to Canada and the Czech Republic, Linda Štucbartová, next to me, executive board member of the Czech-Israeli Chamber of Commerce and the first instructor of empowering self-defense in the Czech Republic. I would also like to welcome Martina Bacíková, who is with us online today. She couldn't join us for our live event here, but we're very thankful that she's here with us. She's the founder of INEV. This is the non-profit organization involved in the development of teaching economic and financial literacy in the Czech schools. Ladies, thank you for joining us today. Maybe let's start the discussion by looking at the situation in general for female entrepreneurs and maybe try make a comparison for how it's working in Czech Republic, in Canada, in Israel. Linda can tell us something about that. So Ayesha, maybe I'll start with you and to just ask you, what is the contribution of women for the Canadian economy?
So let me just first say thank you to all of you who are joining us. A few of you joining us in the room because it's COVID times, the many of you joining us online, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation. It's always a highlight for me when I get asked to speak about issues around women in leadership, women in business, gender equality. They are issues that are important to my government and personally deeply important to me too. And I think the panel is about women in business. I'm not a woman in business. I'm a diplomat, but I can certainly speak to, and I think it's important to underscore why having these conversations is so important. When we talk about making space for more women in leadership in business, I think we talk about the fact that it's the right thing to do. And I think those of us who are part of this conversation, I hope we all believe that it is the right thing to do, but also that it's the smart thing to do, that there is quantitative, hard evidence to support these kinds of initiatives. And so when we look to Canada, for example, we can quantify why this matters, that a third of Canada's economic growth over the last 40 years is attributable to women's participation in the workforce, in the labor force, that if we, and our government is committed to addressing pay equity and gender pay gaps, if we bridge the gap, and in Canada, it's about 88 cents on the dollar, so women earn 88 cents for every dollar that a man earns. If we were to address that in the next 10 years, and the estimates vary, but they range from 40 billion to 80 billion to $100 billion would be added to the Canadian economy. So billions of dollars. All of this matters because of the contribution to society, economy, and I think generally if you look the world over, you would begin to see similar kinds of data. Maybe finally, I would just say that in terms of the business case, again, we know that diverse boards, diverse decision makers lead to a higher return on investment. McKinsey is one of the studies that I like to cite where they talk about specifically gender and ethnic diversity. So all of these issues matter, and I just thank you for inviting me to be part of the conversation.
You're welcome. And in what industries do you think women go for most often when they decide to start a business?
So, in terms of women and entrepreneurs, and I asked my trade team for some of the numbers. So in Canada right now, 28% of our entrepreneurs are women. So that is, we're doing better than we did 40 years before that. We were at 11%, so growing. Generally, you see women concentrated in the sectors that you would probably expect around retail, services, smaller enterprises. I was thinking about stories of Canadian women entrepreneurs before coming on this panel, and I think it's always telling that you see, so for example, a good friend of mine, her company started as a result of her own experience. She was suffering from Crohn's disease. She started a business around protein bars and supplements. essentially for people who are unwell like her. There's an entrepreneur, Barb Stegman, who's got a really inspiring story. Her business, which is perfume and beauty, but attached to post-conflict and conflict zones and products from those zones, a real social entrepreneur, comes from a story of her friend, a Canadian soldier who was wounded in Afghanistan. So I find actually that the stories are quite interesting too, and what that motivation is. But all to say the sectors are probably the ones that you would imagine them to be.
Yeah. And Linda, how do you think this compares to the situation in Czech Republic, for example?
I'll be talking about the Czech Republic, I'll be talking about the EU, and actually I wish I was Canadian. Because Ayesha was giving us some figures, and she said, my government sees it as priority. The Czech Republic very often lacks figures, and I feel our government does not see gender equality as priority. And look at EU. Just recently, Gender Equality Index in EU 2021 report was released. It's called Fragile Gains, Big Losses. And it's quite dismal reading because it shows how women were affected by pandemic, how women enterprises were affected by pandemic. And we know that the Czech Republic suffered really badly from COVID. Enterprises suffered, women suffered because they had to keep double burden. They had to keep schools, their children out of schools on Zooms. At the same time, they were working. And where they are overrepresented, it's health industry, where they got sick, where they got infected with the disease and so on. So actually, let's not talk only about entrepreneurship, but let's take the perspective of a whole society, and we see how disprivileged women are and in the Czech Republic. And I'll give you more dismal figures, entrepreneurial ones. 1.7% of all private capital in EU went to female founders, being 51% in demographics. I don't get it. Okay, 1.7%. So we know it's the right thing to do. We know it's the smart thing to do. And we still don't do it. What kind of a loss of ideas, of diversity, of potential we have here? And very often when we talk about women entrepreneurs, I sometimes the example of forced entrepreneurship. I gave up my corporate job when my son was about to enter the first grade and my mother-in-law was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It was 2013. Forget about shared working schemes, forget about home office and so on. I was working for one very big company and they say, Mrs. Štucbartová, we don't have a scheme for you. Either full-time or nothing. So even that I consider myself a women entrepreneur is like, is it entrepreneurship by choice or is it entrepreneurship by force? And then when women become involved, and that's what Ayesha rightly made, they make a big impact on society. But again, because they are in social services, in education, in care services for elderly and so on. These are again underfunded. So it's again the double burden they pay because who got compensation from the government? Mostly it was the big companies. And I understand they are essential for the economy, but that does not mean that women should share additional burden other than to all the discrimination I just cited. So sorry for being pessimist, but I think it's time to call the things that as they are and to mention that Europe still has a long way to go and the Czech Republic has still a long way to go.
Yeah, I think what you say about, the choice between being entrepreneur by choice or by force, it resonates with almost probably everyone's, personal situation. Martina, hi. you work with a lot of young people in high school, educating them in, economic and financial literacy, which is extremely important nowadays. Do you think that this results in women to feel more motivated to start their own businesses after graduation?
I don't think directly, no, honestly, because I really, what we see in our data, because we measure a lot of data in the Economics Olympiad in past years, also in the Czech Republic and also internationally. We are in 10 countries now. What we see in the data is it really kind of copies the natural sciences like tech and mathematics, for example, because we have 3 rounds for like with the international, but 3 national rounds. First one is school round. We had, for example, out of 19,000 students participating in the first round, the school round, it's like 50-50 women and men. But then it gets to the second round, the best from the school round go to the region round. And then in region round, we already see there is like 60-70% of men and only around 30% of women. So it's, and then the final round, and the regional rounds, there is around 1,000 students out of these 19,000. So yeah, and then to the final round where there is 50 students who are the best from all the regions in the Czech Republic, out of 50 students, and I'm really ashamed to say that, but out of 50 students, we had 50 students, we have 4 women, 4 girls. And I don't think it starts with the Economics Olympiad or it ends there. It's really like we study this quite a bit, and we will continue doing that because we really see it copies the basic. For example, math is a good example because the girls are told that they are not supposed to be good at math or economics. They are not really like, there are very few role models of women who made it in economics somewhere far. Very few. So I think that's kind of this is kind of our conclusion from that. And so that's kind of what data says about the Economics Olympiad. On the other hand, we really try to change it. And for example, in Slovakia, they were quite successful last year with how many women they had in the final round. But it's a long way, and it didn't start it with us. So it's kind of hard for us. We want to change it on our part. We want to help. But we can't help like the 6-year-old girl who is told that she's not supposed to be good at X. So that's kind of how we see it.
So it goes all the way back to high school in this case, that the problem
really
occurs a lot.
I mean, it really does.
This is quite surprising, I must say,
I mean, but I think if we all think about who the role models have been in our lives, I mean, I've often, when I get asked about being a woman ambassador, and I mean, I am pleased and proud to serve Canada at a time when 50% of Canada's ambassadors around the world are women. So women in our foreign service, in our diplomatic corps, can see the possibility. But when I joined, I certainly didn't necessarily think that it was possible because I didn't see many women. So I'm a woman, I'm a woman of color, I'm a mother. I didn't see many women like that doing this job. And that idea that seeing is believing. And so I think it does start young, right? We think about those role models, and that also then becomes a responsibility for those of us who are stepping forward in whatever sector to really make sure that those lessons are learned. I interrupted our moderator already because I had so much I wanted to say.
No, absolutely not. This is a conversation. I love it.
Now Linda's got something to say.
Just to follow up, I'm actually very grateful that there are so many men in this room because I don't think it's about women alone, but about women and men working together. And of course, my husband is a big supporter, but actually he always has been a feminist. Otherwise, he would not marry me. And we've been together for 20 years, for which I'm deeply thankful. But when he got a daughter, he became even more feminist. And this is a turning point because my daughter, Lada, I'm so proud of her, she is gifted in science. So actually she started to get these questions. Isn't physics and mathematics weird for a girl? At high school. It goes on that he realized that actually the statistics, 1 in 3 women will be a attacked throughout her life.
Yeah.
Okay. So then he realized she is much more in danger. And then my husband also realized that whenever she gets to working place, she will earn less just because it was a woman.
Yeah.
So I think actually we need really to tackle this as a societal issue. And very often, being again the only woman on the Czech-Israeli Chamber of Board, it's not easy. And I get asked, did you get there because of quota? And I said, no, I got there. I happen to be a woman. I studied in Oxford. I studied in Geneva. I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have corporate experience. I'm an entrepreneur.
But the assumption is that
that I got there because I'm a woman. And this is exactly the comment I get whenever I look at certain panel that's missing women, that I sometimes remind investors, if they make any sort of call or round and so on, that they should include women. And I said, do you want this only because of gender? And I said, no, it's not gender. It's the diversity, it's the different experience. It's something other we bring to the discussion. And I just wish the discussion shifted from gender to what you mentioned, to the outcomes, to what kind of society we want, what kind of society we want to represent, what kind of inventions we want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but when we talk about, to touch on your daughter, what you were saying, that she goes into this more male-dominated industry, this is a term that is very popular nowadays, male and female-dominated industry. And it seems like everyone tends to stick to their own playground where you're supposed to be, right? So men go towards more the STEM industries. For those of you who don't know, STEM is the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And women go more creative. Seems natural. Actually, for Canada, the Brookfield Institute released a report in January 2019 where they indicated that only about 20% of the Canadian tech workforce was women. And why do you think for these fields there's so very few women?
So, I mean, I think that so much of what we've been talking about, and Linda's described some of the COVID impacts. Those COVID impacts are felt in Canada too, right? When we talk about why is it that women are in certain sectors of the economy and not others, why are there less women in STEM? I think a lot of it has to do with they're the barriers that are societal. They're the stories that we are told when we are children, the stories that we continue to tell ourselves as we grow up. And then there's the looking for role models. I mean, all of these pieces, I think, form part of it. I think about the women who are childhood girls, friends of mine, who went into engineering, who went into math, who went into medical school. And they were tough moments because they were the minority, right? They were always proving that they belonged, that they were capable. And absolutely, many of them have risen to the top of their field, but it wasn't easy. And so that's the other piece of it, is that it does take extra energy and effort, a bit of extra support, the mentors, the coaches, other things. So it's maybe a slightly different package because of the inequality that exists in order to actually achieve. And so, I have a daughter too, and a son. and I mean, the discussions we have around our dinner table, I think it's more than the discussions. I think I go back to that point about seeing is believing. My children see an equal partnership between their parents. That helps them, both our son and our daughter, go out into the world and expect that. And when if they don't meet it, you were telling a story about your daughter before the panel started, they maybe demand it, or they make the change that makes it possible. Again, I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done, and it's personal work as well as structural societal work.
Girls should be encouraged to go into these fields. There's so much work there right now.
Definitely.
And demand, right?
And it starts, for example, the way how we teach math. If we teach math as abstract and as formulas, usually girls tend to drop out, with the exception of my daughter. If we teach it as a problem solving around stories about specific people and so on, then girls excel. The same, Martina mentioned, these competitions and so on. Very often, girls don't like hackathons because there is this competition.
That's it.
While we are more about collaboration, discussing, not necessarily winning the first prize, but rather doing something specific and so on. So again, it's up to the society to devise the tools that would be truly inclusive.
Yeah. And I think again, just to remind, why does all of this matter? In this moment, we have all living through COVID, the leaders of the world are meeting in Glasgow right now, addressing climate change. We are looking at all of these incredibly huge problems. Surely we want to marshal all the talent, all the creativity, all of the innovation to solve these things. And how do you do that when you leave half the population behind, right? I mean, we need everybody at the table, actually.
So when we talk about challenges for female entrepreneurs, we see discrimination, there is lack of investment, there's, like we said, this male-female dominated industries, mindsets. Martina, I wanted to ask you, you are now what we consider a successful young entrepreneur with, what you do. Do you feel that you have to change your approach to be a successful entrepreneur nowadays?
That's a very complicated.
A big question, right? Yeah.
I mean, because of COVID or generally?
Generally, because of the discrepancy of when you enter a room and what is the discrepancy between how many women there are and how many men, for example. Do you feel like you need to change your approach, the way you conduct yourself in general, in order to be perceived in a different, seriously, let's say?
Yeah. Actually, I mean, I think I have to, at least especially in the past, I had to control this a lot, really, because I'll give you an example. For example, 2 weeks ago when I wasn't in quarantine, I went to 2 events, and one of them was founders events, which is usually founders of startups, and there were around 100 people, and I was one of the 3 women there. 3. Yeah. So that's kind of, and it really affects everything. Then a day before, I was at the Manager of the Year conference where I participated, and there are historically very few women even in the competition, and so it's I don't even know where to start, honestly, because there are so many which are different. But really, maybe I will start from a different side, because I really feel, and this is kind of an advice. For advice, because I really see it as a I really see this as very strongly, that I think I got where I am a lot with big part because I wasn't seeing myself primarily as a woman, as female. I was seeing myself as a human, as a person. And so I was really detached from the idea of being a girl. So I would have to do this and that. And this is expected, this is not expected. And I was since I was very little, I was really detached from what girls are supposed to do. So when it was said and expected, I just felt that that doesn't concern me, because girls should do that. Okay, but why is it connected to what I should be doing? So honestly, I think that this part, not being so much concerned about being a female, really pushed me through the first years, which were which were crazy. And I really see why there are so few women doing what I'm doing, because the first years were so hard and so uncertain and so annoying, and there was so much pressure and the annoyance when people ask you to go on a business meeting, and half of the times, more than half of the times, these were dates for me before, because I just found out on a meeting I'm actually on a date and I didn't know about it. So and there's so many things. So I really I didn't see myself as a girl, as a woman for a long time, and at least not a normal traditional one. So it didn't concern me. But what of course affected my behavior was really the everyday kind of sexism. So that's kind of my answer. I'll try to keep it short, but I could talk about it for.
Thank you for that. This is it's nice to hear that it's important to consider yourself on the more neutral level rather than stress on
that you're equal,
differences.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that you're equal and that you have a contribution to
But you
it.
know, I recently had a conversation with a coach, and they said, what is the difference when in the corporate world, maybe you have seen this, when you enter a meeting and the hierarchy, the way you establish the hierarchy from the very beginning of the meeting is where the difference comes. So when you have the guys, the big dogs in the meeting, for example, there's a lot of talk in the beginning of what your achievements are and what you have done. And it's like 10 minutes of, you know, pumping your chest and boasting what you have done. And for women, they want to get straight to the point. Yeah.
Get on with the work.
They get on with the work. But the thing is that this is where, you know, the levels are different, because the one would enter and she would try to immediately do the work. Nobody would hear it because they're not there yet, right? And this is where you establish this level of hierarchy in the room, and who is on top of it, who comes second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, right? And this is where, unfortunately, the woman comes a little bit at the bottom from the very beginning, because of that different approach to the work. Yeah. So that was, I actually found quite surprising, you know.
I think what Martina mentioned, great, it worked for her, and all the respect and congratulations. But we can see how many other women sort of probably gave up on the way because it was too much. And again, one number, it says that every third woman eventually wants to start her own enterprise, but less than 10% succeed because exactly of this. And once I heard very nice distinction between diversity and inclusion. Diversity is that you get invited to a party. Inclusion is that you get to dance. Yeah. And very often, even at corporations, I see the diversity happening, but I don't see the inclusion.
And I think this is actually where, again, in terms of being truly inclusive, it is being intentional. It has to be a conscious decision. And when I'm asked to speak about these kinds of issues or how we're inclusive, I mean, it goes down to, you know, those seemingly quite simple decisions. If you are organizing a meeting and the start time of the meeting coincides with when children are being dropped off at school, and you know that you have mothers around the table who are responsible for that, and they can never make it to the meeting, which means they never get the visibility, which means they never get to make the pitch, which means it has all of these knock-on effects. You change the start of the meeting by half an hour, all of a sudden you've got this untapped potential that's at your disposal. Yeah, I mean, I think the other piece to remember, and I think that point is really important when you were talking about Martina's experience and that not all women, is that there's also diversity among women, right? Yeah. Where, you know, whether it's marital status, whether it's ethnic identity, whether it's ability. And so there are all kinds of other things that play into how we are perceived, the stories we tell ourselves, what feels possible. So there's so much at play there. And I'll just say personally, when Martina, you described that feeling of thinking you were going on a business meeting and it being a date, I mean, truly, I find that actually really upsetting, right? I mean, that it's actually unacceptable.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think we can all attest that we've been
there. And that's the
and
that's the terrible part.
And that's actually
when this happened to me, like the first year of like being an entrepreneur or in business, like this happened to me like every week at least once for years. So, and I wasn't like, it was literally people like, for example, like writing me on LinkedIn that they have like something they would want to share with me, like business wise, and so really that is like, so I stopped actually for like a year or two. I stopped going to any like cold business meetings, basically, if it wasn't connected through someone, or it wouldn't. So yeah, I just stopped because it happened like really too often, and it's just a waste of time really and energy. That's kind of
wow. Yeah, imagine. And all this disrespect, I think again count of 1,000 times when we were asked to do the minutes, to bring
Get the
the
tea.
coffee,
Exactly.
and so on. And at the same time, we were not there as an assistants, but
That's
the
it.
ones to run the meeting.
Yeah.
But it was assumed that normally we would do that, and so on.
Yeah.
So,
My husband tells a story of being at an event on a previous posting, not while we were here. I'm the Canadian diplomat. He's my accompanying spouse, and the conversation being directed to him. And there being a point at which he said, you probably want to be speaking to my wife because I have nothing to offer you here. Exactly.
Yeah.
But the assumption was,
Mhm.
the assumption.
But that brings us to the question of when you start your business, for example, you go to the struggle of life and work choices, right? The work-life balance as well. So how can society contribute to achieve that work-life balance? Especially now with COVID, for example, but even before COVID, it was very difficult you're faced with a choice, right? Family or
And I think COVID just made it that much clearer that when the choice had to be made, it was generally women who ended up staying home, doing most of the caregiving, maybe doing the teleworking plus the caregiving at cost to their own sort of physical health and mental health. And that ultimately when it came back to who goes back into the workforce, it becomes a financial decision. Who's making more? Right?
Yeah.
And then if that's generally not the female breadwinner, then she's staying home and out of the workforce.
So it's like a logical decision, right?
So
as
it
well.
feels quite
Yeah.
rational in an irrational sort of
At the same
system
Yeah.
situation.
actually, I've witnessed many male colleagues begging for exceptions to go back to organizations during the lockdown because they just could not face all the chaos at the household
And it was
so on.
chaotic. It was chaotic. I would say, so you were asking about how do we fix this or how do we help?
In a way, yeah.
And
What
not
is the way
just,
to?
so I mean, obviously we talk a lot about, and if you get a group of women together, they end up often sharing strategies for surviving these kinds of things. So there are lots of personal strategies. Hopefully, in terms of having a partner, and certainly sounds like Linda has one, I do too, in terms of somebody who helps share the burden at home, which really matters. But I think that there are policy responses. I come from a country in terms of parental leave and maternity leave, the equal allocation to either parent, male or female, being really important. My eldest child is 17, and at that point was the introduction of 1 year of paid parental leave, which was a big step in Canada. Went from 6 months to 1 year. I had a friend of mine, we had started our diplomatic career at the same time. His wife was having a baby, I was having our baby. He was going to take the leave because it just made sense for their family. He would get asked, so you're going to be on parental leave, you'll be, do you try to do a master's degree or a PhD? I would be asked, so, how's it going to be changing the diapers, feeding the baby? His response was, I'll be taking care of my baby. I don't have time to do these other things. So, so the societal perceptions, I hope that's changed because now you see more men taking leave, and there's leave that's allocated for the other parent, which is really important.
But still, they are seen as heroes. Very often
So there's
they are
that.
portrayed, in company magazines and so on. Like this is our father on paternity leave, and good for them. But I mean,
Women have been doing that work all along.
exactly. I mean, could you publish the same issue with so many women on maternity leave doing
But I
the
think that's
same?
also then normalizing women at work who also have home responsibilities. I remember speaking to colleagues early on in their career, in order to progress in their career, almost hiding their family responsibilities, hiding their families, right? It wasn't to be shared, and that I think has also hopefully changed. There's so much work to do.
I remember when I was at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that no meetings started before 9 because one of my superior colleagues was taking his kids to kindergarten. But I was the one who was supposed to pick up my daughter, but the meetings went late. I mean, it was in the morning, the set time for him, because it worked for him.
Yeah.
But they totally disregarded that perhaps by 4 o'clock,
Afternoon
exactly,
time.
there is the other part. So I often like to cite Sweden as a leader, that, for example, in Sweden, it's not possible to have a business meeting after 4 p.m. because it's family time. And for those not having family time, it's leisure time.
Yeah.
So actually they can meet someone and they can start family one day and so on. And all these things that just like the norms that we started to realize that are not fit for 21st century. And so on. So this is one really small thing. The second thing is when we go to entrepreneurs and investors, very often they say there is this head-on approach.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you commit yourself fully, work on this 3 months, work on this 6 months, prove that it's working on and so on. Can this work for a woman like me with a family? You know, and I had to sort of reshift my business due to COVID because suddenly I was not able to organize women entrepreneurial missions anymore and so on. I got a mentor and I said, but I need some stability and so on. And he said, Linda, calm down. There is also feed-in strategy. Okay, deep, test the water, go deeper step by step. But how many investors would be so excited?
I think this is what's
And
so important,
accepting
what you
towards
said,
it, yeah.
exactly. First of all, you got the advice. So in terms of women entrepreneurs and access to the advice, access to mentorship, you know, there's access to capital, access to investment, but that kind of who is helping you navigate those circumstances and a way to cultivate, you know, talent for everybody, but in terms of women who are being left out, super important.
Yeah.
So exactly, like for us women, it's not again one size fits all. So for women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship is about creativity. So never believe to any, I would say, Forbes headlines. I mean, they might be valid for some segment of society, but if they are not okay for you, go and find your own way.
If I could say one thing on work-life balance as well, because I get asked this, when I speak to younger women diplomats about having a family and having a big, whatever it is, business, job, career. And I think it's, you know, there are moments when we make choices about when to be, you know, 150% focused on the career and work, the business, whatever we're growing, versus family. And I think it's also about some of the boundaries. So one of the things you talked about, family time. I mean, my children from the time they were little knew that, yes, mommy had to be accessible to the embassy. And so if my phone rang, they had to bring it to me. My work knew that I wasn't going to be checking emails all evening. If they needed me, they had to call me. So, you know, you start to sort of just set a few boundaries for yourself with those around you to help make your life work. Because, I mean, that balance is so tricky. It's so tricky to find. It's a struggle.
That's true. It seems that you ran out of easy questions.
I have lots of questions.
Many pages of questions.
The more we dived into the subject, the more difficult the questions become.
Well, you know, I think because we have experience in this. Martina, you're the younger entrepreneur here, so I guess the work-life balance in terms of family and kids and work hasn't come yet. I do hope that when it comes, if it comes, you will become, and I'm sure that you'll be completely able to manage it, but it is a struggle, you know, it's such a layered thing. And what you said about the meetings after 4 p.m., this is where it gets really difficult, right? Because even if you have a job, even if you're working, you have to always consider, oh, you know, I have to go pick up my kids. That means that I have to leave work at 2:30 to go to pick them up at 3:30, 4 o'clock. Nobody's going to hire you if you have to work for 6 hours, and it just gets, you know, step by step, where you end up in the end, you know what, I'm just going to start my own business, but you then run into similar questions. One of the things that we talk about nowadays is female leadership styles, you know, how they differ, for example, because what you mentioned in the beginning, companies benefit from having more women in them, for example, even in terms of numbers, no, they have the more potential for profitability if there are more women in leadership. So how do the leadership, because to compare between Europe and Canada, for example, even North America, the leadership styles are different, you know. So how is it different? What is the difference?
So I find it hard to define a single style of female leadership.
Yeah.
I think it's more about the diverse voices and what happens when you start talking to people who aren't like you.
Yeah.
And that can be in terms of educational background, it can be any of those categories of diversity. I would say though that from my perspective, maybe what women share, it's not that we are necessarily more nurturing or more emotional or more sensitive or more something, but I think there is a shared experience of being on the margins at some point in our lives, right? And being sort of on the edge, on the periphery. And what that can make you is a little bit more situationally aware to what's going on in a room. It can bring something different to the table. And then when we were talking about some of these experiences and some of these boxes that sort of society puts us in, yeah, there are some sort of commonalities there in terms of the stories we're told as children, what we should be telling ourselves, what the expectations are. So that's where I think the commonality is. It's less about we all behave the same way when we are leaders. I think where we all benefit is from a little bit more authenticity in leadership from everyone. Yeah. So I know when I hear my leadership speaking with sincerity, when they're speaking as themselves, I listen more, I lean in more, I want to hear more, I feel more involved. So I think where we need the authenticity necessarily means that you need diversity in leadership, that there isn't a counting way. And that model that we've been sold of maybe a gravitas, which generally, generally I don't have gravitas because I am smaller and I'm a woman and I don't take up much physical space. You can fill in the blanks, right? There's, but it's, I think it's really about being able to redefine for yourself what that leadership style is.
Yeah. Martina, recently I read an interview with you in one publication where you said that you would be happier if you were more submissive. Do you remember that, where you were asked in that interview? So I found this quite surprising, and I wanted to ask you how does this apply when you're in a leadership style for a young entrepreneur nowadays?
I don't think so at all, actually. I think being more submissive as women in business is not a good idea. I think in an interview I mentioned they put it in the title, and I thinking like people really told me like I'm, you know, of course, like every woman heard that at some point and probably many times that you should be like less, you know, assertive, that you speak kind of loud, you shouldn't like talk too much, you know, and because like I think the standard for women with talking. Because generally, like we know from the research that the women speak less than men in like meetings and stuff, but it's not like the women's standard for speaking is not like compared to men, but it's compared to be silent and nice, right? So yes, I think like it's not good to be submissive at all, and like nobody should do that. Like it also depends how we define that, right? Because it doesn't like. Being submissive and nice doesn't mean that you, or the opposite doesn't mean that you are like behaving like a bad person or anything. It's more just like being comfortable with who you are and expressing it to the world. And I think that's important in business because also, you know, in other parts of life as well. So just to conclude, I really think that you should go like really far. There was I saw a question in the comments like how to find motivation when people say you these things, and when society says these things to you, that and every day basically, like from media, people, you know, family potentially, how to find strength and motivation to go far. I would like to add like a positive note, because I think when you make it as a female entrepreneur or even like female employee, like top employee, I think actually the benefits of getting there are higher for women than for men. So I think if you do some in your head, if you do some risk benefit analysis, then the benefit for women getting on the top, the risk and the risk and like the obstacles are higher for sure, but the benefits are also higher because you are more visible, you get invited, like things, and people actually know about you more than if you would be a man. So to conclude, I really think that don't be submissive, go for what you want, and the reward is bigger at the end if you get there.
Big compliment.
And one remark, you are always visible on pictures, on group photos.
I mean, it's interesting, that question about motivation. And I think, thinking about Linda, this when you shared your story and how you ended up where you are, I think there's something that's so powerful in knowing why you do what you do, where you came from. Those are pieces that as anybody, men or women or whatever, actually just reflecting on that is a real source of strength and can be a source of motivation when the world is telling you, or the other people around the table are telling you that you don't belong, because you actually know why you're there.
Yeah.
You know why you belong. And so there's a position of, I think, power there when we know our own stories.
Yeah.
And to all women leaders watching us, I have one encouragement. McKinsey study identified 7 leadership styles, and actually the women styles, as described by Ayesha, the approach that's more cooperative, more inclusive, more based on consultation, rather they say do this, do that, and so on. This is 21st century leadership. Don't forget that we have total new generation coming to workplace that will be actually asking for what sometimes we have been only dreaming. So I mean, you cannot just say to them, do this because I said so, and so on. Something that was actually quite typical for beginning when we started career, just like, do this and that's it. And so on. So I think there is a great potential, and to all women leaders and potential women leaders, yes, we can.
Yeah. Yes, we can.
And nowadays, again, in the Czech politics, there is a high demand for female politicians, because we know that the future government will face challenges and they need to be more cohesive, they need to pay attention to include more society. So I'm glad that actually the discussion is starting.
It's moving. Yeah. So one of my last questions, and this is inevitable not to discuss, let's talk COVID. We couldn't go without touching it. It has been here for a long time now, almost 2 years. It might not go away for a while. Whatever, progress women made for the last few years, it has been set back significantly because of family expectations. Can I ask you what is the impact of COVID on female entrepreneurs? How did the numbers change? Maybe first with Canada, then in Czech Republic.
I mean, in terms of, I don't specifically on female entrepreneurs, I don't have that exact number. What I can say is that the numbers I've seen floating around are things around, for example, 500,000 women out of the workforce due to COVID, and due to all of those other responsibilities, right? Not just illness, but due to all those other responsibilities. And at the same time, I think Linda mentioned this earlier on, women were doing the highest risk jobs during COVID in terms of medical, service, cleaning, all of these other things. So there was this real disconnect doing these jobs that we needed to be done during COVID, and yet paying this huge cost in terms of health, but also in terms of losing that position in the labor market. And again, so to end where I started, the broader society losing the benefit of that participation. So it ends up being, what do our, as countries, build back better programs look like, and how do we address that to make sure that we bring those women and other groups that were left behind or take it out of the workforce back in. I mean, I think that there's the situation is probably varied when you ask different women entrepreneurs, their different experiences. Some were able to create opportunity, right? To get creative and innovative and identify new possibility. others are struggling to survive.
Yeah.
And I suspect that picture is the same the world over.
Yeah.
I also think that it's too soon to give any figures and numbers because right now we are facing another way and so on. But personally, as I said, from entrepreneurial missions, I shifted into the empowerment self-defense. And the sad thing we have not mentioned is the shadow pandemic.
Yes.
It's the rise of violence, the rise of domestic violence. But even in Prague, what we have seen is rise of violence in public spaces and transport. Prague transport being considered secured and safe. And now it's changing because of all the frustration and so on. And I've seen many clients that I was coaching that suddenly they started to face hostile environment and so on. And that's actually why I became the first empowerment self-defense instructor in the Czech Republic. And now I am totally dedicating, feed on strategy, but dedicating myself to teach girls, women, but also boys and men about this violence prevention, because it's so necessary. And again, it's something we should not be closing our eyes at.
And again, this is a point that you had made, that this isn't just a women's issue, right? This is a societal issue, one that everybody has a role to play in. And as much as we look at what it is to be a woman in business, woman leader, ideas of masculinity are very important too, because we see it in society, how it plays out to the benefit, but also the cost of so many.
And for example, some sexual abuse of boys and men, that's something that's even less disclosed than sexual abuse of women and girls and so on. So,
But the point about gender-based violence, again, we saw it in Czech Republic, we saw it in Canada in terms of rising numbers, and that idea that to stay home, to stay safe when home was actually not safe for some people, many women, was a really disturbing, worrying trend that demands attention.
Yeah. And now, after all these changes are happening, do you feel that there will be more support for women in business in terms of investment, accelerators, programs where they can participate in?
So I am an optimist. I have to believe the glass is half full. And I mean, I see, my government certainly sees, and I represent a country that sees that that we have a feminist government, a feminist foreign policy. We have money that is being committed to support women in entrepreneurship, and that includes, I mean, it's something like a $6 billion investment over a number of years. It includes 10 million a year for the work that we do here at the embassy and at our embassies around the world in terms of supporting women entrepreneurs break into markets and grow their businesses. So that to me is an important commitment. I think we need to see more of it, but we also need to see those other pieces, the societal change, right? So much of the barriers that we've talked about aren't just about women, women entrepreneurs. It's about women looking to realize their full potential in any sector of society. So there's a lot to be done.
Yeah. The hope is for more investment, more investment opportunities, because now what you mentioned in the beginning is that very little goes
1.7. 1.7.
1.7. But why do you think this is? What would be the reason for this huge?
I think that's what we discussed already. Where you see technology, where you see the right way to approach to find a company. Where do you see these talks to investors?
Yeah,
it's known that usually men are asked about the perspectives and growth, and if it's a women enterprise, it's like, have you considered the risks? And what are the obstacles? And I mean
that amazing sort of unconscious bias.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm also an optimist, and also sitting next to Ayesha definitely makes me one. Well, we have seen that we have now the highest representation of women in the Czech Parliament. I mean, 25%, 50 women, but good. Still better than before. So there is a progress. So now actually I'll be looking forward how these are translated into deeds, how money is allocated, how we get the gender perspective on top of agenda, how we talk about inclusion, how we really want to talk about the strategies that will make the Czech Republic country in the future and country of innovations and so on. And for sure, we need women to be at the table for that.
So I think that, for our panel discussion, I would like to thank you ladies for the conversation. It was very interesting, very informative. And maybe we can give the audience a chance to ask some questions here and online as well. If we can start with any of you guys, if you have any questions. Yes.
Should I start? Yeah.
If you would like to.
I'm Sotiris Karagiannis. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies of UNIC and a dedicated corporate coach and trainer for almost 30 years. Started my career at the age of 10. I have been training salespeople in the automotive industry for years. And what I remember that 20 or 30 years ago, there would be no single sober individual on this planet to think of this job as not being male-dominated. I have trained women in this profession, and I can tell you for certain that they're much better in selling cars than any of their male colleagues. Now, is this information known to anybody? Maybe only to me. Why I'm drawing this analogy? Because I think that in addition to what you're saying, what we're missing is how we make the brand of the woman entrepreneur known to the public. And I'm also turning to us here as educators, because in my MBA programs, we never talk about case studies of success of women leaders or entrepreneurs.
The stories matter. We need to know the stories.
So for me, it's not just a matter of finding the balance between men and women. That's definitely the case. I know for certain that there are many things that women are much more competent than men, and that's not the point of the discussion today. But what I'm raising is, to what extent do we all work together to increase awareness of case studies of excellence of women in any field, be it entrepreneurship or any other field you can think of?
And this was my plea to men, help us.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And very often, actually, thank you very much, I am reminded again by my mentor, it's like work on your visibility, because we focus on getting the work done. And you mentioned it with the beginning of the meeting. I totally could see myself there. It's like time is precious and so on. And this way we forget to share our achievements, share our successes and so on. So thank you very much.
I think we should include a course in our MBA about, and maybe you can help us with experience of case studies.
Yeah, that would be amazing to collect some. Yeah. So, do we have?
Yes, a few actually.
Yeah.
So from Arash, would it be possible for you to talk about your experiences in becoming successful? Can you be more specific about what you had to manage? To tackle the hurdles and become successful?
I think that could be to Martina. Would you like to? Did you hear the question? Would you like to share?
Yeah, I'm just thinking what should I really. Because to be more specific, I think the biggest struggle for me now is the kind of the passive sexism, everyday sexism. It's more I'm at events where there are most men on the top of my field, and I'm supposed to be for people who don't know me, I'm the wife or the girlfriend of someone, right? So it's, for me at this point now, it's kind of really annoying stuff. Not super annoying, I can just ignore these people, right? Or tell them, yeah, I'm not here with anyone, I'm here for myself. But it's kind of annoying if it happens to a few times a day, really, but I don't really think that now with my position now, I don't have serious problems really, because even if I do, I can just either ignore, I can just decide not to work with the person. I can, I have options in at the point of my career at this point. So I don't see it as a thing right now. But to be more specific on this, for example, I mentioned this passive sexism and inviting, to like business meetings, which turn out to be dates and stuff, which is like a minor thing in a way, in comparison to what other things. But to talk about it in more detail, I really like the light at the end of the tunnel is there, because I mean, it happened to me the first few years of my career, but I was at Forbes 30 under 30 in 2020. And after that, I don't get these at all. I don't get any like LinkedIn, like offers to collaborate, and then it turns out to be like, like a glass of wine with someone chatting about like whatever. I don't think like since 2020, since the Forbes, I got like 2. And so I just want to emphasize, and also like at the events when people, I get sometimes like these like passive sexist comments, and like people expecting something to be somehow, and but it's like the people who know who I am, then they don't do it at all. And so I think that this is like a really interesting power dynamic. I would call it power dynamic, honestly, because when I was young, people didn't know me. I didn't have like resources. I did have some company, but it wasn't like it was very, very small and not influential. Then usually the men, and this is not like by far every man. This is like very few % of men, I would say, but they do it like a lot. This few % of men. I would say that like these people, they know exactly what they are doing, and they target the young women. They target people, women who are starting their career. Women who don't have power, and if they embarrass themselves in front of the woman. For example, I think it's kind of embarrassing if you invite someone to a business meeting and then you are on a date. I think the person like kind of embarrasses themselves. But then if the woman if they would embarrass themselves in front of the young woman who doesn't have in the power, they just wouldn't care. It doesn't matter, right? But if they would do it in front of, for example, the ambassador, like there is a potential risk for them and consequences from doing that. And it could be that, like someone else would know, or the ambassador wouldn't decide to work with them and stuff like that. I really see this happening because in past like a year or almost 2 years, it didn't happen to me. And I really see that this could be the reason. So if you are a young woman who has these issues, I just want to assure you that when you make it really goes away a lot. Not completely, but like it really goes away. Like in my case, I would say like 95% of it went away. So that's kind of like a specific as I could get with like keeping the point focused on one thing.
I could say maybe also it's really important, I think, whatever stage of our career we're at, that asking the question how to be successful, but what does success mean, right? Because it's at different stages in your life, success can mean different things. The idea of a position or earning a certain amount of money, maybe that's the goal, but maybe not. And so I think that this important piece of just constantly being aware, because that helps you navigate the choices that you make, along with knowing sort of what your purpose is and what your goal is. And I think just every so often, that process of reflection, again, can just help define the path.
Yeah. Oh, I would summarize it with 3 rules that I will always stick to. Number 1, like be yourself, really. Like don't try to be a chocolate liked by everyone. And this inner anchor really helps you in challenging situation. Then second, I knew that I will never sacrifice family for my work. I wanted both. So, and with this comes number 3. And I think we still have a long way to go. Get support, get help, ask for mentors, ask for advice. We cannot do it alone and so on. So there's only so much I do, and there are plenty of things I just don't do. I don't have time and so on. So I guess this is also something that sort of would help many future women entrepreneurs or leaders. I mean, we don't have to do it by ourselves.
And on that point about advice, if you ask somebody for some help, what's the worst that happens? They say no. maybe they say yes, right? And then you get the help and you got that extra bit that you didn't have before. So I think that kind of, it takes a bit of courage, but if you tell you, like, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, talking about asking for mentoring, I just want to offer, because I do have some extra time now. So my quarantine ends at 9th of November. So if there would be anyone in the audience interested and you would like to take with me, I will be accepting like 1 or 2 mentees. So just write me an email. You can.
Good for you,
Amazing.
honestly.
Yeah. Guys, I apologize
for free. So man or woman, anyone who is like growth oriented, that's the people who work with the best.
amazing.
Cool. And
Yeah.
Sorry guys, I got lost. So what about when you feel like you can't ever become successful and you can't do it? How can what would you advise to people or to young women to how to stay motivated in order to move forward in life and grow for the future given all the uncertainties and pressures?
That's another big question, right? Because I think in the first instance is knowing that you're not alone in feeling that way. I think we all feel that way at certain stages in terms of self-doubt. And it goes back to, for me, the stories that we tell ourselves and the supports we have. Because I think with knowing that, with clarity of purpose and knowing that you belong, these are all things that actually help you make it through those very difficult moments, which again, we all have, right? I think there are also other tips and tricks. I mean, one of the things, I also have some mentees and we talk about what you do before you go into the room, right? So you know you're going in, how do you want to project the homework that you do? So being prepared becomes important. There's research around, the power pose and the sort of the internal dialogue, the standing tall before you go in, all of these things that just help and actually have sort of, impact the brain chemistry in terms of our confidence and our composure. So again, it's to come back to sort of mentorship and coaching as being so key and to that kind of learning.
To not give up as well, right?
To not give up.
To continue going, because failing is part of it, right? When you're building a business, you have to understand you might fail 1, 2, 3, 4, 50 times, but you have to keep on going. And if something doesn't work out, it's fine.
And
try something new.
And that's when my Israeli perspectives come in.
Yeah.
I mean, when you meet an Israeli, they say not only how many startups they launched, but also how many of them failed. And this shows that they were trying hard and they learn, because we learn from failures.
Yeah.
I mean, remember, I always give a parallel how we used to learn how to walk. It was one step, boom, one step, and did we say, oh, we'll never walk? No, we kept doing it. And here, especially in Europe, I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but if you say you failed, it's like, oh,
like a dirty word, right?
Exactly.
It's
You go to bank and you'll never get another account. And so, oh, this is the failure. And then, you hear the rumors and so on. It's a learning. I mean, we should not take ourselves so seriously. I think I have redefined myself. I don't know how many times, and COVID has taught me another lesson, and so on. And still, I still think I stick to some main values and frameworks. So please just keep trying and believing, and this will work out. Look at Edison and his light bulb.
Yes.
So please, let's be more supportive for failures. Let's share not only our successes, but actually how many times something went wrong. And always, if you want some failure lessons, write to me. I have plenty.
Maybe to react this as well, I really think that this is, for example, myself, I also like the good point from ambassador is like everyone feels like that. I also like, I do remember I had like a year and something ago, I had some like a crisis because I was like thinking about getting an investment for the other of my companies. And I'm like, and I just like checked the statistics and everything. And it kind of got me, into like, not depression really, because it's more like a despair in a way of like, how will I do it? Like, this is so hard. But then like after a few days, I was like, yeah, you know, like, because I think like the cure for this is having like a really strong mission of for yourself and your company. Because even so, I kind of like after like a few days thinking about it, I kind of decided like, yeah, am I willing to work, if it's necessary, am I willing to work like 2 or 3 times harder for this than someone else might? And is the mission strong enough? And I said, yes, of course. It really matters to me that this thing will happen and we will make it with this project. And so the mission, it kind of like cured the problem, because like, especially in the beginning, like it's really hard to imagine yourself succeed. And so with this, it's more about like, for me, what really helped me, for example, is I like have a really strong personal mission for my company and what we do, because it overcomes the, you know, for example, like I heard like 1.7% of EU funds are investments are to female founders. Linda said that. This is like real harsh statistics. Who are you to think that you would make it among this 1 to 7%, right? Like, and this gets to you. On the other hand, I really think like if your mission is strong enough, you can figure it out. You don't have to take investments. You can do other things. You can, you know, like bootstrap your way up, which means that you finance it yourself, which is kind of what we do. But it's because we are a non-profit organization. So I think having a strong mission and thinking about, and that makes you think about our creative things. If you feel like you don't have access somewhere, you probably have access somewhere else, and you have to be creative. So that's kind of how I think about it.
So basically, we conclude with ask for help.
Yeah.
Don't be in this alone.
Yeah, because you're not alone.
Yeah.
Cool. I like this one though. What is your experience when it comes to showing your emotions at work? Because from someone's experience, when men shows their emotions, anger most often, it is considered normal and as a sign of power, something like a strong boss. But when women do the same, it is considered being weak, too emotional, unstable, and sometimes even hysterical. What has caused this perspective in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a hard one. It's a hard questions. I mean, again, I go back to the authenticity that I like to see in leadership and the authentic leader that I try to be. I absolutely, you know, workplace and professionalism, etc. But that doesn't mean the absence of emotion or the absence of humanity. You know, if you're having a difficult conversation and it is emotional, either, and I think there's a difference between being emotional and being disrespectful. Yeah. So raising a voice and yelling to me is unacceptable. Being caught up in an argument, being upset by something, I mean, this is human, and that there is room for that. That's not where the discussion ends, but there is room for that kind of human reaction.
I actually like emotions. Yeah. You can see that I'm emotional myself, and everyone can read in me like in a book. But I mean, emotions show that we care. Yeah. We hardly get emotional about something that we could not be better. So actually, when there is some issue that's a sign for me as a negotiator, and also a sign to an opponent, and then again, let's work.
People are invested
exactly
in whatever you're talking
exactly.
About.
Yeah. So in this case, one thing I learned, and it's again my suggestion, my advice, that whenever I come, I try to look like a lady. I had my period when I was dressed in gray, in dark. I was
invisible.
I try to be indivisible, but it's hard to be invisible when you're 174 centimeters, you know, and so on, and blonde at the same time. So I mean, I actually try to wear dresses, skirts, colors. So when in a room full of men, when I say something and it's totally different perspective, they stare at me, at least like from the look, they know that they are getting the diversity, they are getting the opinion that's perhaps totally new for them, and so on. You know, during the COVID, when they were solving all the businesses and economy and so on, I was talking all the time about mothers that lost jobs, mothers that were looking for computers and so on, and about this charity and so on. And then we got the big picture. But sometimes this is how I deal with it. Like, I try to be deliberately different.
But I like your point about that emotion actually demonstrates that somebody cares. I think that's an important point. And then what do we do with that emotion, right? How do we then work together to find that solution that's going to get everybody ahead?
And one actually mistake women do while mimicking men's style of leadership while not being authentic, they get even tested more, because it seems to me that sometimes men are sort of trying to get to their boundaries only just to know how to negotiate and deal with them.
Well, and as the person who is, if you are mimicking somebody else's behavior, my goodness, that takes a lot of energy and work to be something that you're not. Now, many of us have had, of course, occasions where you have to behave a certain way because that's the expectation. But I think you can still bring your authentic self in there, right? There's room to find the happy medium. But it's incredibly freeing when you actually bring your whole self to what you're doing and the result personally, but also I think for the organization or the team can be that much better.
I'm back. I want to apologize. I'm not sick. I have taken like 1,000 PCR tests. I've just had a flu for a long time, and these are the after effects. And when you talk too much, that's what happens. So I'm really sorry to you and to everyone online for this small thing. I warned you that this is gonna happen, you know?
You did good.
We've been taken care of.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you.
I have a question. So obviously there is some problem between man and woman, like whatever it is. So my question is, like, as a man, what can I do better to be? I know it's a question like you can talk for a long time about this, but like generally, how can I be better towards man to slowly like solve this?
So one of the things that I often say, I get asked about advice to women and advice to men, and advice to women is often to use your voice more. Advice to men is often to just take a moment and listen and try to understand what the women around you are sharing and being open to that, and being open to the fact that maybe you give up a bit of space for them and you provide some support to them in terms of what they need, not necessarily what you need.
I think there are many small things you can do, and thanks for asking the question. Absolutely. And already by asking means a lot and shows a lot. For example, next time during some project, make sure that you have both women and men, that you bring on some classmates, female classmates. Next time you speak on a panel, I get this often from males, all male panel, and then you ask one of them, oh, I was not the organizer. And I said, come on, you read
see the names.
Exactly.
So you could ask the question.
Exactly. So then ask the organizer, makes this extra step. Yeah. Like your distinguished professor, talk about women. Next time you have a guest speaker in class, invite one class a man, another class women, and so on. There are successful women leaders. Look for these balanced perspectives and so on. So I think these are actually small steps, but they can mean a lot.
Huge impact.
So what my boyfriend does with the panels, it's he's a prominent and when he's invited to all man panel, he just rejects to the invitation and reasons with the organizers.
Absolutely. Give the reason. Yeah,
it doesn't go there, and like usually they actually, because of him, they add another 1 or 2 female speakers to the panel, like, and they're like, yeah, we are like sorry, and like we want to have you. So that's kind of like one thing. My boyfriend is a radical feminist. He's more feminist than I am, I think. So that's good. But yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, it's there are like multiple things, and I think it's also in just when you see something, because I really think like there are like very few men doing like ugly things to women and like having these like sexist comments. These are not like everyone. These are like a few men, but they do it a lot, it seems. So maybe like when you, as a man, when you see something like that happening, it's for us women is very limited to, we can say something, we can defend ourselves, but this man, he had this comment because he doesn't value women usually, or doesn't value their opinions or whatever, and it's some problem on his side. But as women, it's like hard for us to really like be heard when we talk to this person and assert ourselves. And so to all the men, if like one thing I would like to I would really appreciate is that, you know, when you see something like this happening around, it could be like on a street, it could be on an event, it could be at a meeting, just speak up and tell the man that this was inappropriate, or, you know, like, yeah, let her answer that question. Like, I want to hear what X woman has to say about this. So that's really helps a lot, actually, because to men who do these things, we women have like really limited influence on them, like stopping or becoming better at being people. So.
I also like the trick that women in Barack Obama administration
support
started
each other.
by echoing, but also, I mean, if there is a woman who mentioned this idea, credit her to this idea, you know. So as Ayesha mentioned, as Martina mentioned, and so on. So she gets the recognition from others for what she presented and so on. So thank you, Martina.
Yeah.
And once again, sorry for this. Yeah, thank you so much for coming and for this amazing conversation today. And yeah, you have a question, or you just?
It's not too late.
We still have a couple of minutes, so please.
No, of course, yeah.
A couple of minutes sounds like eternity. I just want to share a few things. Thank you all for your comments. I'm Andreas Antonopoulos. I've been teaching entrepreneurship in MBAs for the last 20 years. And I also happen to be a partner in one of the investment funds in the region. We're doing early stage seed investment. So I was listening very carefully. And I would like, first of all, to confirm a lot of the things that you shared and build on a few things that Linda mentioned, and then ask just one question. I have a whole section in my class discussing about female entrepreneurship, and indeed the numbers are dire. If you look at the US, I'm escaping Europe, if you look at high growth tech entrepreneurship, you have a very good decade, the last decade, growing from about 4% to 6.5%. That's very good growth, but still points exactly to what you have been discussing. Something much more practical in the region. I just brushed some numbers upstairs before coming down here. We have had 97 companies pitching for seed investment in the last 4 years. 7 of them had female founders. Only 2 of them had a female founder who was the main founder.
Wow.
If we look at some of the companies in portfolio, there are no female founders. There's one company that have had a female founder who opted out because she had a baby a year and a half after starting. So indeed, you know, a lot of the things, even to make it even worse, which sounds kind of funny, the latest investment we had last spring was a company that the product exclusively serves women. 3 male founders. It's kind of, I mean, they are self-sarcastic when they come up with that.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is that there are a lot of studies that they're seeing about how this can be improved. One of them, I think, first of all, Linda was mentioning about the 1.7%, I think, that has been spent. The truth is that right now there's a tremendous amount of liquidity. The funds are unable to deploy the capital they have. Nevertheless, you don't have a lot of companies coming up with female founders. It's not that the investors will go around the street and try to get people, to start a startup. It's just that they're not showing up. They're not there. And if you look at a lot of studies about how this can be improved, I think you mentioned it has to start from the scratch. So you cannot regulate the outcome. It has to come with STEM. Somehow you need to start early. You need to start at, you need to start at high school. You need to start at kindergarten. We had a very good presenter in our graduation ceremony about 6 years ago. It was a renowned Nobel winner out of Israel, was claiming, I don't know, Linda can confirm, that they start teaching entrepreneurship at kids in kindergarten, which is great. That's a generic statement. Now more specific, how can we get more women into STEM, into businesses? That's something that has to be addressed. And something else that has to be addressed that all of you touched upon, to some degree, if I can call it the unfairness of life. You need to be able to support women towards meeting entrepreneurial goals or meeting entrepreneurial dreams, given the fact that they'll have, for now, an unfair burden when it comes to family care. So somehow, unless we find some way as a society to support more women, well, they're bringing up families. And I can look at my wife, we'd love her to start, we can bankroll her. Either I need to step back substantially, or I need to have a lot more babysitters. So unless we, I personally, with my sort of experience for the last 20 years, I have seen these two major challenges in holding women back. They're very capable, they're much better. Investors would like to see female founders. They're much better on team playing, emotional intelligence. There are a lot of good things that come in there. They're just not around. They're not knocking on our doors. And if you manage to somehow help to solve a little bit more women going into STEM, or you manage to get support somehow for women into one of the most productive periods of their lives, when they hit with the burden of supporting children and taking care of the family, or if you can balance this more fairly, that would help a lot. Now, it would be great if we can think of things, but other than that, it's really tough. And I see changing, it's getting better. There's an accelerator that specializes on women on maternity leave, but it has a long way to go.
Yeah. Thank you. Another example from Israel, that actually they have pre-accelerator. Because in accelerators, they realize that they get mostly male applications. So they actually did this exactly to prepare them and so on. So to level the ground. And yes, I showed the statistics, but I don't think it's the bad investors versus the poor women. I think it's basically, we go again back to the societal level where we started. What's the value of inclusion? What's the value of diversity in technology and in innovations?
And designing your interventions to
exactly into what the society needs. So thank you actually for summarizing our panel so well. And it leaves us more with more questions than answers. So perhaps
we
next
remain
time.
hopeful. Remain positive and optimistic, and mainly to encourage women to start businesses, to be entrepreneurs. That's important. And just to add on what you said, is that currently with my company and my partner, we are part of an accelerator. There are 25 startups and just one female led, which is really, really shocking, right? So
Joanna Jenkins, I teach professional development. I also work in the MBA program as a coach when I'm not doing corporate training, corporate coaching, communication. As a female entrepreneur, I would like your perspective. What can I do to empower my students in a business background? What can we do at this university starting now?
Okay.
So you are an entrepreneur. You should,
I would suggest be more careful about these specific rules. As I mentioned, Ayesha also mentioned, we tend to be more cautious. It's okay to have this approach, head on versus feet in. We don't tend to draw this hockey stick graphs, because we are more realistic. Okay, so it's also okay, but I think the beauty is truly in diversity. It's like to have few female founders together, join with some male founders, male mentors, and that's where the magic happens.
I think it's also to maybe introduce them to the practicalities of being an entrepreneur. So, for example, the resources that you need to start your own business, like the tools that you need, how to pitch your work, how to create your investment deck, all of these things that many women are not prepared with. You have to always Google it, but there's so much information that you're not really sure which one is the correct one. And I think that a lot of girls could find this very useful, you know, like how to start your company, how to do your accounting, how to do your KPIs or the OKRs, you know, like those little things that you don't think about, right? So I personally would have found it very useful if I knew all of these things, you know, if I had the resources, that would save me a lot of time, and I actually think it can put you on the same level as everyone else. You know, the first step is you start the same, I would say. This is from my perspective.
Now, provided failure is the same for both men and women, because we know in entrepreneurship, if a woman fails, we attribute it to her gender. If a man fails, we say he's a bad entrepreneur.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why women still are scared to enter, because they're afraid how they will be taken in case they fail, which is quite likely in entrepreneurship,
Because
no matter if you're a man or a woman.
That's actually why we substituted a glass ceiling with glass cliff.
The last clip, exactly.
So
Excellent conversation.
good, excellent conversation. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for the audience. Thanks for the wonderful questions. Martina, I hope you're gonna feel better soon.
And do
Yeah.
reach out to Martina. I
Do
mean,
reach out,
this
yeah,
was
she's been
incredible
It's an amazing offer that
So
you
I
made to
hope by
100
now
people.
your inbox is full, because that's again,
Yeah.
like ask for help,
Yes.
ask for support.
Exactly. And
And
mentorship is an
use
amazing
exactly.
way. It's an amazing tool to use someone else's knowledge
Mm-hmm.
to advance yourself. It's great. So
They're great, and I would love to have a mentee from one of yours. So go you.
exactly. Okay, so
you.
yeah, thank you, and have a nice evening.
So curious, you come up, can we just get some group, quick group
Absolutely.
photos?
Do you want us with
Why
masks?
don't we try and get here
Yes.
so we can incorporate Martina?
Yeah, okay.
Martina, stay with us.
I almost connected already.
Fine now, it's just, I feel like I need to.
Come on, so I think we want to
Over
do it.
here a little bit first. We'll do one with just the ladies and then one with Sotiris.
As long as we do it fast.
In front of the table. Sotiris, one with just the ladies.
Just the ladies.
You know, I'm so. I said.
And then one with Sotiris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait, just one more.
Okay.
Maybe if you all just